Good point. And one of the goals would be make her job temporary if possible. And again, life does happen, and there's going to be circumstances. I can remember when I was a teenager, my mom got sick, almost died, and consequently she had to go to work to pay medical bills. And she worked and worked and worked and worked for a while, just temporary, but what was 3 or 4 or 5 years seemed to me like an eternity. And even though I was a teenager at home, I resented the fact she had to be gone from home a lot. And, but it was temporary, but she's trying to fill a need. Now that I'm older, I realize they had debt they had to pay that took them a while to pay it off. But as a kid, you don't always understand that. Point number 2, make a budget and live by it. Communicate about every financial decision. That fits with something we talked about last time on communication. Communicate on every major financial decision. I don't mean every can of beans you buy, you got to make a decision, but on major financial decisions, communicate about that. And so when he comes in and he's bought a $2,000 lawnmower without discussing with her, and she said, and oh, by the way, I bought a new living room suite, it was $5,000, and I didn't discuss that with you, they're in trouble. And that may be part of the frustration. Make long-range plans may be helpful. But here's the point is, she has a need for financial support. That's one of her basic needs. Let's shift gears again. He has a need for domestic support. Let's see what that's about. Harley, page 204. What he has a need for is a creation of a home environment for you that offers a refuge from the stresses of life, managing the home and the care of the children, and if there are any at home, including but not limited to cooking meals and washing dishes and washing and ironing clothes and house cleaning. In other words, being a keeper at home. One of his basic needs is he needs domestic support. Now, let's talk about a common circumstance in many families, and then we're going to talk about the biblical principle. Common circumstance, a man works hard all day. He comes home and the house is a wreck, no meals prepared, the dishes are piled up and the bed is unmade. We're not talking about an occasional circumstance. What we're describing here is this is repeatedly every day, or this happens more than it doesn't happen. And what happens is his love bank takes a hard hit. Why? If somebody just described that marriage circumstance to you, and then they said, I don't understand why his love bank was hit so hard. Can you explain why? Okay, that's true. Anybody else? And somebody says, I just don't understand why when he comes home the house is a wreck. I mean, he says this happens 4 out of 5 days a week, 28 out of the 30 days a month, whatever. Clothes are piled up, the dishes, I mean, it's just a wreck. The house is a wreck when he comes home. And he complains his love bank is taking a hard hit. And I don't understand. Can you explain why he says his love bank's hit? Why does he consider that a withdrawal from his love bank?
It would create like a stressful, strained environment at home, and after working all day, you want to have a place to come to use for refuge and rest.
Yes, absolutely. Let's reverse that. Would his love bank take have great deposits all of a sudden? When he's worked all day, he's frustrated from work, he comes home, instead of the house being a wreck, it's most of the time, not occasionally, but most of the time, things are picked up, a meal will be prepared, the dirty clothes are washed, the dishes are taken care of, and the bed is made up, and he comes home to a neat, orderly house. And he says his love bank had great deposits. Can you explain why?
He feels appreciated.
Yeah, he feels appreciated. Then the reverse is also going to be true. He feels unappreciated, doesn't he, when he comes home? That's a common circumstance. Let's go to the biblical principle. The wife is to be a keeper at home. This is something that's not taught much in the world, and even in the church. It's not taught as much, perhaps, as it should. Let's turn to Titus 2 and in verse 5. Let's start there. Talk about this mean and what this doesn't mean. Titus 2 and verse 5. Someone read that for me. Who's got it? Just go when you got it. Titus 2:5.
Be discreet, chaste, homemakers, give obedience
right, this is in a context. I guess I should get my Bible open to show you that. Let me go to Titus 2. This is in a context of being sound in the faith. Go back to chapter 1, verse 9. He talks about sound doctrine. I want you to notice how many times the word sound is used. The word sound is used in Titus 1 and verse 9. It talks about sound doctrine. Sound in the faith, Titus 1:13. Sound doctrine, Titus 2 and verse 1. Sound in the faith, sound in faith, Titus 2 and in verse 2. Verse 8 says sound speech. The context talks about being sound in the faith. The word sound it's a medical term that has to do with healthy or wholesome. We talk about a body being sound. It's a healthy, wholesome body. And so, is your faith sound? Is it healthy? Is it wholesome? That's the context in which everything sits. So let's forget about the woman for a moment, and let's just talk about another principle to illustrate. Let's talk about how young men, look at verse 6, are to be sober-minded and showing yourself a good pattern of all things. He'd be a good example. So if the young man's not a good example, could you say he's sound in the faith? No. What if he's not sober-minded? Is he sound in the faith? No. Let's look at another case. Older men, verse 2, are to be sober and reverent and have love and patience. What if he's hateful and he's impatient? He doesn't endure. Would you say he's sound in the faith? No. This has to do with being sound in the faith. So my point is, whatever this means, that she is to be a homemaker, verse 5, or she is to be the King James says, keepers at home, workers at home, good housekeepers, as some of the translations used. Kenneth Wuth says, caring for the house, working at home. In other words, she's to be a homemaker, is the idea. That has everything to do with being sound in the faith. So if she's not a keeper at home, then she's not being sound in the faith. Now let's talk about what that involves. That involves housework, caring of the family, and that involves a lot of work. Now let's balance the comments we made a moment ago. He comes home and the house is a wreck. He needs to be patient with the fact she may have had a lot going that day. The kids are going crazy that day. She may have had a lot of errands to run. She may have had a lot to do for him, and etc. And so she didn't get everything done that day. That happens sometimes. And so he needs to be patient. He needs to realize it takes a lot of work to be a keeper at home. Let's talk about what that doesn't mean, and then let's see what you have to add to that. That doesn't mean she's a slave. I think I've known of husbands that think the wife is a slave. I want this house clean when I get home. I want the dishes done. I want these clothes washed, and basically you're a slave. That's not what that means. It doesn't mean she can't work outside the home. I've held several meetings in places where that was the common view in the congregation, that actually think it's a sin for a woman to work outside the home. I don't think that means that. I'll come back to that in just a moment. Nor does it mean the husband and the children can't help, because she's got enough work to do that if they help with that, she still has plenty of work to do. But let's go back to this principle. How do you work out this conflict where she says, I need to work outside the home, but I need to be a keeper at home? What would be your advice to her? Yeah, if she feels like I've got to work, we've just got some finances, and I'm frustrated. I don't want to do wrong. I've got to work, and yet the Bible tells me I've got to be a keeper at home, and I don't. What do I do? What do I do?
That's what he needs to share, her and other responsibilities as well.
Okay.
If she's going out working, he should be able to make up for that by helping at home.
He can jump in and help her with some domestic responsibilities. That's true. What else could be done? Or what advice would you give?
First and foremost, she needs to tell her husband the conflict she's having. He needs to be aware of it so that they can come to an agreement together.
Absolutely. This is where communication comes in. Rather than her being built up with frustration, saying that I want to do what the Lord tells me, but at the same time I have an obligation. I've got to work, and we know the bills have got to be paid. We're going to get behind. My advice to her would be do that very thing. They need to sit down and communicate. My advice would be he needs to help with that. But my advice also is There's nothing wrong with her working outside the home as long as she can still fulfill what God told her to do. She can't violate this principle, can she? I didn't give her that responsibility. God did. And so she needs to make sure she's fulfilling that responsibility while at the same time working outside the home. Let's carry that a little further. Most men need domestic support. By domestic support, we're talking about the house being taken care of so that there's peace, quiet, and tranquility there. He doesn't have to work his job. I mean, the point is, so he doesn't have to work his job and do that too. I've known of some husbands, they may be very few in number, who've worked all day, and their wife maybe not even have a job, and he comes home and he keeps house too. And he's pretty much doing the cooking, he's doing the washing, he's doing the cleaning and keeping the house, and then he goes back to work the next day. And his love bank is taking a very hard hit. Now, Harley suggests, and this is his expression, a time bomb. Household responsibilities can be a time bomb. How could the household responsibilities be a time bomb? The wife resents the husband's lack of help and support. She feels like I'm having to do everything, especially if I'm working and I'm having to do everything, and he's sitting there watching television and he's not offering to do a thing. And it's not very long till she's going to blow a fuse, most likely. How else could that be a time bomb? He may resent having to do the housework and seeing to the children's needs, which he shouldn't, but he may resent that. And then the conflict keeps increasing because household responsibilities are not getting fulfilled. Let's talk about some suggestions and some solutions and some answers, and then we'll move to the next one. Let's just go ahead and list these, and then we'll develop those. There should be 5. Clarify the roles for the husbands and wife, and each fulfill their role. That's where this communication comes in that Drew just mentioned a moment ago. They sit down and they communicate. Communicate and talk about household responsibilities. What can we do about the conflict? You know, the kitchen's always a wreck. I don't mind doing the cooking if you don't mind cleaning the dishes. Or there may be another solution. Get organized. Be willing to help with a job that's not your job. So you may have decided in the household responsibility, I'll do the cooking and you do the cleaning. It doesn't mean he can't do some of the cooking and she can't do some of the cleaning, etc. Last one is probably the most important of those. Do your job for your mate. If you're doing it for your mate, finish my sentence. In other words, I'm cleaning the kitchen up for you. I'm doing my share of the cooking for you. I'll help with this responsibility for you. Or she says, I'm cleaning the house up and I'm making the bed up for you. Yeah, making big deposits. And that's where you discuss things in your family and you communicate, and that makes big deposits. Does that make sense? And for one husband, it may be one thing. For another husband, it may be something else. If nothing else, in our household, if nothing else gets done, if the bed's made up, that makes big deposits for me. In other words, the kitchen could be a wreck. If we have a choice, the kitchen's going to have dishes in the sink and the bed's going to be unmade. You make the bed up, that made big deposits for me. Because I'm an organized person, I can't stand to see it in disarray. Does that make sense? But for another husband, he may not care what the bed looks like, but he walks in the kitchen and it's dishes piled up. Maybe you need to clean the dishes up for him. So when I see the bed made up when Joan's in a big hurry, and the bed was made up, I know she did it for me. Make sense? Do things for your husband, do things for your wife. Let's shift gears. She has a need for family commitment. Again, this is Harley's survey. This was one of her 5 basic needs. She has a need for family commitment. What do we mean? Harley, page 204. Scheduling sufficient time and energy for the moral and educational development of your children, reading to them, taking them on frequent outings, educating himself or herself in appropriate child-rearing methods and discussing those methods with you, and avoiding child-rearing methods and disciplinary action that does not have your enthusiastic support. Kind of a convoluted statement that says she wants him to be into the family. Isn't that what that said? That's what she wants more than anything else. Now, let's talk about Bible principles here. Fathers have a responsibility to the children. Some husbands have the concept that, you know, I father the children, but it's her responsibility to raise them and educate them, etc. And you need to tell him different. What would you tell him? from the Bible? Where would we go scripture-wise? You're trying to tell this husband, you know, in rearing these children, it falls on your shoulders as the daddy. All right, Ephesians 6, 1-4. What does it say? Yeah, fathers, it falls on his shoulders. She may do most of the instruction. She may be the one who does most of the child rearing because she's with them more. But ultimately, the responsibility falls on his shoulders. If it's not going well, who's to blame? The daddy, isn't it? Because that's where the responsibility lies. Is he is the head of the household, and God placed that on his shoulders. So what she's wanting is a husband who understands the principle of Proverbs 22, and in verse 6, bring a child up in the way that he should go. What the wife needs is a strong family unit. The woman has a powerful instinct to create family, probably more so than the man. Wives want their husbands to take a leadership role, to take responsibility for leading and to commit himself to moral and religious educational development of children. We're living in a time of the women's liberation where the thought is women want freedom and they don't want a man leading her. Godly women, generally speaking, I think, want a man who takes leadership roles. And they resent being married to a man who doesn't take the role. Does that make sense? I've known of marriages where the husband is constantly shoving that leadership role off to the wife. And why would he do that? Why would he constantly, when a decision's got to be made, he kind of shoves it to her? You make the decision. There's a basic reason why he does that. He can blame her when it goes wrong. But he wants the credit when it goes well. We made the decision to do so-and-so. But I told you that wasn't going to work. And so he shoves that off on her because he's afraid of making that decision and he doesn't want the responsibility. A woman wants a man who's a leader, who takes responsibility, and he's committed to the moral and religious educational development of the children. Here's an ideal situation where the wife could wish her children turned out just like the father. Young ladies, if you haven't, as I mentioned a moment ago, if you're not already hooked to a guy and you're looking for a husband, look to a guy that you would like for your children to turn out to be just like him. If you don't want them to turn out just like him, he don't need to be the daddy of your children. Does that make sense? Because they're likely going to turn out to be just like their daddy in many ways. Here's why. Because fathers have a profound influence on children. Girls often idolize their fathers and boys imitate their fathers. And most of you, and there may be exceptions, but most of the guys in here can say, yeah, I imitated my father and I wanted to be like him in many ways. And many of the girls said, yeah, I idolized my daddy too. I was daddy's girl. And that's why you want a husband that'll do that. When he doesn't do that, the woman often looks to another man to take that role. It may be a friend or a grandfather, and there are many women who've done that they kind of steer their children. I want you to look at this guy because this guy will teach you what being a man is like. And you'll be kind of the father role. So what she wants more than anything is family commitment. Now, let's talk about family time. Ephesians 5:16. I use that expression. That's not Harley's time expression. That's mine. And because that's what we talked about in our family when our kids were small. We talked about family time. What does Ephesians 5:16 say? Redeeming the time. What does that mean? Somebody paraphrase. I'm suggesting that Ephesians 5, one application of that, is in your family, make family time. Have family time. Have family time. What did the passage say? Redeeming the time. What does that mean? Yeah. Budget your time. Make wise use of your time. When there's family time, I'll talk about what all that means and includes here in a minute. Family time has to do with scheduling time, and everything else is cleared no matter how busy you are. Some of you have heard me tell this before, but I can remember times when my children were small and they'd be in my office back before we had cell phones and back even before we had caller ID. It's hard for some of you to imagine that, but we did. When the phone rings and you don't know who's calling. And you'd answer the phone, and it'd be one of the members of the church here wanting to talk about something. And I'd say, can I call you back later? I have someone in my office. And I wasn't trying to mislead them. It was my kids in my office. But you know what? Those kids were just as important as if it had been one of the elders in my office, wasn't it? Or some member with a problem. Because I'm trying to salvage somebody's marriage problem over here, but I'm trying to salvage my kids too. And so I ain't got time to talk to you right now. I've got somebody in my office. It was my kids. We might be just playing. We're having family time. And so make family time with your children. That strengthens your marriage and makes ties and bonds with your children. Makes very strong ties with the family. This is Harley. He says take 15 hours a week. I don't know how did he come up with that term? I started to say I didn't know how he did. I do know how he did. He tells in his book he came up with that by asking women how many hours needed to be in family time before, that's not the exact expression he used, I don't think, but how much time does he need to spend with the family before you feel like he's meeting your needs? Does that make sense? And some said more, some said less, and he came up with an average of 15. I'm just throwing it out for what it's worth. Here's the point. Spend some time, he calls it 15 hours a week, or refers to it, where the purpose is being a family and influencing your children. Now here's what that's going to include. That includes meals together. That's a very important time. Sitting down to a common meal together at supper. And we all sit down to the table at the same time. There may be exceptions when you're going to be going to different, but sit down together. Family outings, attend services together, have Bible time, have bedtime stories, take the kids on a walk, on a bike ride, play ball, whatever. Family time. Where no matter how busy you are, you've got time to do whatever. And the macho guy, if you don't have kids yet and you have a daughter, you'll be playing Barbies in the floor. You're going to do it. And when you got a boy, you're going to be playing army and soldiers or whatever it is he's interested in. You're going to be pitching ball. You're going to be doing that. Family time. That's important. Very, very important. Proverbs 19:18. Let's read that. Somebody get that. The idea here is start young, influence them, and that's going to carry on even when they become older.
Discipline your son while there is hope, not set your heart on putting him to death.
Discipline your son while there is hope. What does that mean?
Start young while you still have a chance to influence and mold him.
Yes, before time gets away from them. And doing this will either make deposits or withdrawal from the love bank. Family time. If she watches her husband and says, you know what, he never has time for the kids. They ask him to do something and he just didn't seem to have time for them. And then the next week it's the same way. He's making some big hits on the love bank and it's going to hurt. And when she sees he's taking time with the kids, and I know he's busy, I know he's got work projects to do, but he's always in the floor playing with the kids, or he's out riding bikes or pitching ball, he's doing et cetera, et cetera. Big love deposits in the love bank. I want to mention this quickly because I want to get to the next principle before we run out of time. She's wanting a man who disciplines the children. I won't take the time to read the passages. You're familiar with them all. She wants a husband that's consistent, who understands that spanking works, who agrees with her and they have a united front, who controls his anger. In other words, the husband and wife need to be united in the rearing of the children, and who doesn't leave all the discipline to the wife. He takes care of his share of the discipline and they stand united. That's a strong family unit. And the importance of that is the children are going to find that break between them if there's ever a break between the husband and wife. Now, let's talk about his need for admiration. Does it make sense what we're talking about family commitment? She's looking for a man who is committed to the family relationship. He's a family man. Last one, and we're done. He has a need for admiration. What do we mean by that? Harley, page 206. Respecting, valuing, and appreciating you, rarely critical and expressing admiration to you clearly and often. In his survey, he found that men said that generally speaking, they needed a woman, needed his wife, to show some admiration for him. Now, let's talk about Bible principles. Wives are to reverence and respect their husbands. Bible passages. How would I show from the scriptures that she needs to be one who admires him? Wives, see that you respect your husbands. Where's that? Ephesians 5:33. She's to reverence, one translation says, respect her husband. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, she has reverence and respect for him. She, in that passage, by the way, she is submissive to him even though he's not a Christian. And that's not because she thinks he's the best husband in the world. He very well may be. But it's because she is reverencing him and respecting him because, first of all, she reverences and respects God. And she cares about his soul in that passage, by the way. She's interested in his spiritual welfare. Now, man needs admiration. Let's talk about what that is. And what he's looking for is honest admiration. That's a great motivator and inspires him to achieve more. How could that be? When he's got a wife that just really admires him and she motivates him, that whatever he's accomplished, he's ready to go even further. Yeah, absolutely. Admiration is rewards the achievements he's made, whether it's at work, something he's done as a hobby, something he's done whatever. It rewards the achievements he's made. I think most men would agree with this. The admiration is more satisfying than a paycheck. Doesn't mean he doesn't want the paycheck. Yeah, he wants that. But that's more satisfying. In other words, maybe he makes an accomplishment, he gets a promotion at work, and he got a pretty significant salary increase. But his wife praises him because he's worked hard at that and she admires him for that. That means more to him than the pay that he got. I think most men would agree with that. He likes that admiration. What it does is it builds his self-esteem. Maybe it's the male ego that's being stroked. It builds his self-image, his self-esteem. He needs his wife to be his most enthusiastic fan. Would you agree with that? He needs her to continue to admire him. Self-esteem usually begins at home. Low self-esteem starts early. In the interest of time, I want to get to another principle. Quite often, guys who have low self-esteem, we're talking about males here, and there's some women who have low self-esteem, but guys who have low self-esteem, that usually starts with family and friends being critical and praising very little. Some parents mean well by, instead of praising their children when they've done well, they tell them what all they did wrong so they do even better. And so that destroys their self-esteem. And so he may have low self-esteem, and he expects his wife to pick up on that. And he's expecting when I get married, she's going to be critical all the time too. Self-confidence and esteem usually begins at home. I can remember my parents telling me when I first started preaching, I knew my efforts weren't that great, but they would tell me how great I did and you can keep doing better. And instead of critical, they encouraged. And I think I would have quit preaching had they not done that. And so be the parent, be the wife, etc., that builds self-esteem. Let's move away from that. Let's go to this. How do you show admiration? Let's talk about how you show admiration. We're going to list 5 ways you do that and we're done. You help me with that. How does she show admiration? How you talk to him. Do you talk down to him? Or do you commend him and praise him for what he does? And we're not saying she doesn't need to receive that admiration from him, but we're talking about the 10 basic needs, and this was one of the 5 basic needs that men listed in the survey. And he says, I need that admiration from her. Let's start with this. Let's talk about she needs to be honest in her admiration to him. In other words, it doesn't need to be fake. It doesn't need to be flatter. She needs to reflect genuine feelings, and he can usually tell the difference. In other words, she doesn't need, when she doesn't appreciate something,